Hello, and let's try this again. We're Untracing Trauma, episode 2. I have Karayah on here. We're having technical difficulties today, so let's see if this stream actually connected. It may be like a 20-second delay, so everyone just hold and pause.
I am not seeing it.
I'm not seeing it
either.
Please try again.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and... there it is. Okay, we have it. We're just gonna start it automatically. Okay, we are on. Sorry for the wait and all the dramatic setup. Basically, anyways, welcome to Untracing Trauma. We have JeGaysus, and how would you like to introduce yourself, Karayah?
Yeah, so I'm JeGaysus. My pronouns are they, she. And I have been an atheist for about 3 years, but I was deconstructing for probably 10 years before that.
Okay. Ooh. So, 10 years, what? Well, there it is. Okay, that puts you in what age group 10 years ago? When was 10 years ago? This is
I was
2012-ish?
Yeah, I was about 19.
Okay, so you're already an adult. And then you decide, hey, this isn't for me. I'm going to start deconstructing. What led you to that? Or where would you like to start is maybe where I should ask. Would you like to start at the beginning? Go over kind of what type of Christian, what denomination you were? Let's start there.
So I feel like I had a lot of questions. So I was always thinking about things. I feel like when I was 14, there was a passage in the Bible that was no big deal to everybody else, and I almost had a mental breakdown over. And it was Luke 4. It was in Luke 4 where Jesus has just come back from being tempted in the desert for 30 days, and he comes back, and his hometown is he tells them something. And the people are so enraged that they have him up against a cliff and they want to push him off and kill him. And all it says is that Jesus passed through. And I was and then it just moves on to the next chapter. It starts telling a completely different story. And as someone who has been in love with stories since I was a tiny child, I played pretend way longer than my friends. They were like, we're 11 now. We shouldn't be doing this anymore. And I'm like, but I want stories.
But I love Santa.
And so, as someone who is in love with stories, I was like, what do you mean? How could this sacred holy text think that this was a proper way to tell a story? I have so many questions. When it says Jesus passed through, does it mean he was Andre the Giant being everybody move, and they had no choice but to move? Did he literally walk through them? Because I was coming up with all of these scenarios, and every single one of them, I was like, if that happened, half of them would bow down to their feet and immediately worship him and do whatever to and then the other half, which I think would be the majority, would be convinced that he was some kind of demon or something it would have spread everywhere. He would have been crucified way sooner than he was.
Yeah.
So I was like, if I can think of all of these things, why didn't God? Because I was taught biblical inerrancy, that the Bible was 100% truth and that everything in it was exactly what God wanted it to be. And so when I was reading some of these passages, I'd be like, really? Really? That's how? Why?
And I think that's one of the interesting things. I think Christianity, whenever they moved to an area of inerrancy, they really did themselves a disservice, because where there are contradictions, sure, some of them are easily explained, or you can make general loopholes, but as soon as you add in inerrancy, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's either perfect or it's not. And there's literally no way with translation in place that anything can be perfect. So was your entire family Christian? Were you raised Christian?
Oh, yes.
So from birth?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. From birth, I was dedicated. So this is kind of a funny story because my name is Karayah Holly. And when I was dedicated, the pastor said Korea, Holland instead. And so I make a joke that that's why I'm an atheist, is because those countries got dedicated instead of me.
So you're just never technically saved because that pastor messed up.
But, yeah, my mom, so my mom's side of the family is Jewish. My mom came from a very Jewish family, but like more of a culturally Jewish family.
Sure.
You know, I don't know how to say this in a way that isn't anti-Semitic because I was raised Christian, but the way that my mom explained it to me is that her family was like the Jewish equivalent of Christians who only go to church on Easter and Christmas.
Okay, that makes sense. That's why I feel like, no hate to anybody who's like really devout Jewish, but I feel like almost every friend I've had in my life that's been Jewish is exactly the same. You know, they'll show up for family events, special holidays, but they're not going to be having a Shabbat dinner every Saturday.
My grandpa was only showing up if he got a present or he was getting fed. Like, yeah. You know, so...
That's how my best friend in LA was, too. Like, totally.
Yeah, so when I was... so my mom, when she was 18, she became a Christian. And she actually traveled with a deaf and hearing ministry group for about 7 years. And that is why she is now fluent in American Sign Language. It's something I've always wanted to learn more. But she became very immersed in the evangelical Christian culture. Okay. But, you know, deep down, she's always been left feminist and very, you know, like an open-minded, open-hearted person. So a lot of that kind of contradicted, especially once they moved to the Midwest Christian culture.
Midwest Christian culture.
Yeah. Which my dad is kind of to his core. My dad has been studying apologetics since he was in junior high.
That makes sense. I was going to say, how do you go from this liberal feminist view, or not you, but your mother goes from this liberal feminist view of like Judaism and falling right into literalist evangelicalism is quite a jump. So I was going to say, where did that bridge happen? But of course, if your dad was raised more in a similar light to this literalism, I guess it would explain some things.
Yeah. And then, you know, so I was 2 years old when my parents moved from Southern California to Missouri because they couldn't afford the cost of living after having me. And so they moved, and even though I was, you know, basically from 2 to 32 lived in Missouri, I never felt like I belonged there. Yeah. You know, like sometimes I would be, because the church that I grew up in was a very like progressive, liberal, non-denominational church. They still had some problems, but
sure.
Especially in Southwest Missouri, was a very progressive church that like taught that, you know, that women aren't just supposed to be like submissive servants to men and things like that. But it was such a young church that it didn't have a youth program. So my parents would take me to a mega church in the area. And that one was Assemblies of God and everything that comes with that. And so I was getting two very conflicting messages.
I was going to say, not everything has to be a youth program. You know, you don't have to drive to a mega church just because there's no youth group. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, so it was something that then...
Is that where the trauma begins? The mega church?
No. I mean, it didn't help.
It didn't
for sure. Like, my mom was a very, you know, she went back to school when I was in junior high. She got her master's in psychology, and she became a counselor. And one of the youth pastors at that mega church, the biggest mega church in our area, was telling people to not go see my mom as a counselor because her kids worship weird.
What does that mean? How does a kid worship weird?
Right?
Like, you know, did you ever get an explanation on that? Like, I'm trying to picture what that means, and I don't know.
Like, I'm sure it just meant I was like, I don't know, dancing in a really weird way. Because I was socially awkward and didn't know what I was doing.
Okay.
But so the way, part of the reason that my mom converted to Christianity is because, so her mom passed away when she was 16. And she grew up unwanted. So she was the third girl. And at the time that my grandmother found out she was pregnant, she did not want a third child trapped in a loveless marriage. She had just found out that her husband was having an affair with a 17-year-old babysitter. And she did not want to move forward with the pregnancy, but my grandpa really wanted a boy. And instead, my mom was born. And so, you know, she's the third of three girls. And Lori was my grandpa's favorite. Lisa was my grandma's favorite. And my mom was the third unwanted child.
Why they gotta pick favorites?
Yeah. Well, then when my mom was 9, they got divorced. And they had a really, really messy divorce. And he married, a month later, he married his 8-month pregnant mistress. And they had 3 boys.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Greg was Ronnie's favorite, my grandpa's second wife. Eric was my grandpa's favorite. And Brett was
How did they all know who was the favorites? Like, who's giving out this information?
Because my grandpa was someone where it was obvious. Like,
Okay.
he would shower his favorite with affection. You know, the women too. Like, I don't think my grandma was really trying to like be like, oh, well, this Lisa is my favorite. But it was the one that she had the special bond with, and she didn't have that bond with my mom. You know, my mom, like my grandmother was a woman in the 60s. You know, if you've ever watched like Mad Men and you see what like, you know, Betty goes through with her husband's, you know, infidelity and, you know, it's just something.
I've seen it just from watching like, you know, my grandparents and just hearing the stories about also favoritism. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And so my mom and my Uncle Brett were the third unwanted children of the bunch. And they are the 2 that became Christians separately. And so she had a very strong bond with my Uncle Brett. Okay. And so because of that, my sister and I had a very, very strong bond with my uncle.
Sure.
And my uncle, he converted to Messianic Judaism because his mom was more devoutly Jewish than my grandmother was. She was the kind that would go to the synagogue on a regular basis. Her faith was very important to her. Sure. Not to say that it's not important to secular Jews. It's just not like she like walked the walk, you know? And so when my uncle became a Christian, he really missed that side of his heritage and his culture. So he converted, and he decided it was really important to him to move to Israel. And I want to just give this disclaimer. I am still learning about what is politically going on in Israel. So whenever I'm talking about this, I don't mean any shade to people living in Israel. My uncle had really severe mental health issues.
Good disclaimer, because same, not with the mental health issues, but like my knowledge about Israel and Palestine only goes X far, and it's like that much of a 1,000-year-long thing going on here. But okay, go on.
So when my uncle moved to Israel, he had a complete and total psychotic break.
Really?
Yeah, he very quickly started spiraling. We would get calls from him saying that the government was out to get him. We had no idea. We didn't find out until years later that he was undiagnosed bipolar, and he was unmedicated, and he was experiencing psychotic features. And he was completely away from his family, like literally in another.
Right.
And he would call my mom and say that the government was out to get him and that Jesus was a fraud. And at one point he threatened to hang her from an effing flagpole. Like, this is a very, like, mentally distraught person.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, because I had just started high school. It was like my first or second week of high school. And I came home and my dad was home. And that was weird because he should have been working. And my parents sat me and my younger sister down and explained that my uncle had wrapped himself in a blanket, poured gasoline on that blanket, and he set himself on fire. I should have given a content warning about this. I'm so sorry.
I forgot to do it at the top too. Content warning, trigger warning, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, but...
Undo it from your brain. Sorry.
But, and he had third-degree burns over 90% of his body. So it was...
He survived? No,
it wasn't a question of if he was going to survive or, like, die. It was when.
Got it.
And he passed away 5 days later on my 15th birthday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that really shook me.
Yeah.
You know, my uncle lived in New York when September 11th happened. He saw from his apartment building the towers fall. And I think about this every September, from September 1st, when I found out, to September 11th, of what he went through and what he saw on that day and how much that impacted him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to believe that there is a loving God that has everything in control and is working things out when you are faced with that. 2 months later, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And so I went from that to my dad being sick.
Yeah.
And my dad had cancer 3 times in 5 years.
Wow.
My dad is still with us. He is in remission now. He has been in remission for
good.
At least 12 years. But what we went through as a family, it had changed us to our core.
There's no way it couldn't. Losing somebody and then going straight into, like, almost future grief over your father, like, there's no way that doesn't change the dynamics of everything, and it forces you to grow up really quickly as well, because I can't imagine that fear of, like, expecting to have to take care of the family, almost.
It was that, but it was also dealing with my dad. He had 2 bone marrow transplants. For the first one, they took his bone marrow and they purified it, and then they put it back.
Okay.
For the second one, it was someone else's. And there's this thing called graft versus host disease, where you have to keep the person's... If the person's immune system is too healthy, it will attack the new bone marrow and won't accept it. But if it's not strong enough, the person will die from illnesses that should be no problem, like a common cold or a cough or flu could take the person out. And so my dad was on very high dose steroids. And steroid rage happens even if it's prescribed by a doctor.
Yeah.
And the third time that he had cancer, there was someone else in my church who had cancer as well, and also went through a bone marrow transplant. And he was only 25. He was such a tremendously sweet person. And I would talk with his wife and be like, so, you know, is Nathan yelling at you? Has he pushed you? Has he, been banging down doors? Has has he threatened you? And she was just like, no, like, he got mad and broke a controller at once, but he doesn't treat me like that. And, my dad, he had to have both of his hips replaced because of the high dose steroids. It actually caused the bones to start collapsing.
Really? I didn't know that was a symptom or like a side effect.
Well, yeah. Well, what happened to my dad's hips happened to Nathan's spine. It started collapsing on itself, and they couldn't stop it. And right before he died, he was in so much pain. He was in an unbearable amount of pain. And he was still asking his doctor if there was anything that he could do for the doctor. So for me, watching someone who deeply loved his wife,
And this is when he was 25?
25. He died 2 days. He died like 2 days before his 26th birthday. And this was someone who deeply, deeply loved his wife. They wanted to have a family. They wanted to have kids together. He adored her. Yeah. He was this free spirit who never wore shoes in church because that's how he felt free. He would help anyone if they needed anything.
Sure.
What kind of God lets my dad, who was being verbally and abusive to my mom and my sisters, or my sister and myself, live, but let Nathan die? And I hated myself for asking these kind of questions, because it wasn't like I wanted my dad to die. I just wanted him to stop being abusive. But I couldn't reconcile how a loving God would make that choice to let a man in his 50s who had kids, who had a wife, he decided to let my dad live, but a 25-year-old who had his whole life ahead of him could have spent the rest of his life with his wife. They could have had a family.
And it's a fair question to ask. I mean, not only just because of all the trauma that you were going through in that moment, but the fact that there was so many parallels that you could actually judge, like almost on a hand-to-hand basis, it makes it a little bit even more unique than somebody. Again, I don't want to like pit traumas against each other, but like it's a little bit more unique even than just somebody being like, "Oh, my father died of cancer," but to watch somebody else go down a parallel path and then have the outcomes be entirely different. Those questions are natural.
Oh yeah, it's completely natural. And I knew that if my dad had died, that I would have been devastated.
Of course.
It's not like I was wanting, like me dealing with these questions meant that I was wanting something bad to happen to him.
No, but it was wanting accountability from God. And I think that's a fair thing for anybody to want, especially if it comes down to losing a family member, being like, why? I mean, it's the oldest question ever, probably predates God, is the why when it comes to death. So I just want to make sure that you're not holding yourself accountable to that now. But so in addition to the passage that you gave, is that kind of the same time about where you start having these realizations that you're like trying to get mentally out of the church?
I was 20 years old. It really started this summer before I turned 20, when my dad was recovering from a bone marrow transplant, and I took off a semester of college to be his caretaker because my mom was working, 2-3+ jobs to provide for our family. Sure. My sister was, a 15-year-old. She couldn't be a caretaker. So I was, and I was happy to do it, but it was crazy to me to see how my dad could talk with me and be calm and, and then he would get on the phone with my mom and just start screaming at her over nothing, over things that it was like, this is no big deal. And he was screaming at the top of his lungs. And it was like, how can you, because not only does that mean that it means that he had the ability to control it. He had the ability to turn it on and then turn it off. And he decided that he was going to, because and I think it genuinely, and I hate to say it like this, but I think he liked me better than he liked my little sister, because she was severely ADHD and he was severely ADHD. And when you see parts of yourself in someone else, that can be very difficult for that person. And I've learned at 29 that I have ADHD as well, but, I was able to do really well in school. I was able to, it took me a long time to get diagnosed because it didn't present the way that my sister was diagnosed when she was, in kindergarten.
Right.
And, and so the fact that my dad would treat me one way, but then treat my sister and my mom a completely different way was so difficult for me because he was the only prominent man in my life. And so if I'm watching the man that is supposed to be teaching me what love is, that God supposedly chose to be my dad.
Yeah.
It really starts to mess with a person who has just entered adulthood. And in the midst of that, I lost my best friend. She didn't die, but she was someone who, I was unbelievably close with her. When my freshman year, when I was going through my uncle's death and my dad having cancer, she really took me under her wing and became my mentor. And then after she graduated from high school, our relationship changed. We changed from being mentor-mentee to being friends to being insanely close friends. And then my dad got sick for the second time. And, and she would call my mom. She would call my dad. She was very, very close with us. But then when my dad got cancer and we were, I was like, hey, you are my best friend. I'm needing support right now. She couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And right before the summer of my senior year.
So she distanced herself actively because of it?
Yes, she
ghosted
distanced
you?
herself. And then when I tried to ask her what was going on, she said that this is stuff that I've had to work out in therapy, but she told me that I was a damaging relationship in her life and she couldn't know me anymore.
Well, I mean,
yeah. And
fair, everybody set your boundaries, do what you need, take care of yourself because your mental health is important. But why you got to say it like that?
Yeah, exactly. And it was something that, for me, it was like I shut down. Every relationship that I had at that point was a safe relationship. But for the next, 5 years, probably longer than that, I kept new relationships at a very surface level. I was terrified to date because if a girl who was my friend could hurt me that badly, what could a guy do? If I fell in love with a guy and he decided I was a damaging relationship that he couldn't have in his life. And so I really just closed off my heart. And after I went to community college, I then transferred to a very conservative Christian college because I couldn't afford college. My parents, because of my mom's student loans and my dad's medical debt, they couldn't even co-sign a loan with me.
Why? So why does the conservative Christian college, is it cheaper? I don't know enough about Christian colleges, I guess.
So most of them are
bureaucracy.
very expensive. Most of them are, but this particular college had a work program. And so...
Oh, so it's a cult.
Yes. Yes.
I hear work program and I'm like,
Yeah, so they had 50, it's still open now. They have 50 different workstations across campus, and you work 15 hours a week, and then one 40-hour work week during your break, and that covers your tuition.
That's not bad.
No, it wasn't bad.
I was worried. My friend went to one where they made them wake up at 4 a.m. to do drills and prayer from 4 to 6. Like, we're talking running laps. Then they immediately had to go to work, and they worked from, I think, 8 to 11. And then they had 3 hours of class, and then had to work from, like, 5 to 7. And I was like, that's insane. And they have to get up, and every day, across campus, everyone, like, it was a smaller one. It was like 2,000 kids at this college. And I was like, that's a cult. Like, what do you guys...
Yeah.
They're trying to get you starved and food deprived and no sleep, waking up early in the morning and exhausted before you even go to work. I'm like, that's not... She got out of there, thankfully, but... So 15 hours almost sounds like a breeze.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely, like... could have had it worse. It was really great that I was able to graduate without debt.
Oh, you graduated from there?
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, I graduated. But socially it was very difficult for me because at the time I still had a lot of internalized homophobia and but I also, my mom being a counselor had really like taught me to put myself in other people's shoes and try to, and I always, even though I believed that what the Bible said was true, I didn't understand why homosexuality was a sin, why God would create people and then like say that the way they
Well, according to my TikTok comments, it's because butt stuff makes God cry. So, did you think about that?
I went through like an evolution of being like, well, it's a sin, but we all sin, and everybody. And then like I went through like this evolution, but like for me, it was really like, I have an issue with food. I've always like for years have had an issue with emotionally eating, binging sometimes. And the thing that can be really difficult about that, as opposed to like, if you're an alcoholic, you stop drinking, and like, that's easier said than done, but you stop drinking.
Yeah. But you can totally avoid it. Right.
Yeah. You can't stop eating. You cannot stop eating. You will die. So it's kind of, it was something that
I never even thought about that, but that's a really good point. That's so
And so for
scary.
me, it was like, it caused me to have this like radical empathy because I was like, okay, I can't imagine what it would be like. I had no idea I was bisexual at the time, but I had no idea what it would be like if I was only sexually attracted to people that I could never act on it or I'd go to hell.
Yeah.
Like,
okay. That's a good way to put that.
Like, to me, it was like, you can't stop feeling attraction to people. You can't stop, like that feeling, that like romantic longing to connect with another person and be wanted and seen. And so, especially towards the end, I was just like, I don't even care if it's a sin. I don't care if when I get to heaven, God says, you did all of this, but you did this and it did not honor me because you chose to love gay people. Then God was going to...
How dare you choose to love gay people?
Right?
The one thing I hated is love.
Right.
Not even that you yourself were acting in a homosexual capacity. It was the loving of gay people that will be the sin. Because that's how evangelicals think for whatever God knows reason.
Well, yeah, because they like... I didn't get this from my main church, but especially the Assemblies of God church that I went to for the youth program. They really like say things like, every person that you don't tell the gospel to, or that you like allow to like, like sin and you don't say anything, that their blood will be on your hands. Yeah,
it is your job personally to save every single person you come into contact with. Otherwise, you're complicit in their sin.
I had no idea that I had an anxiety disorder. So that stuff stressed me out. I would have trouble sleeping sometimes.
I bet.
And it's something where I would, so I went from my very progressive church that, like, just to give an example. So, like, Ephesians 5, a lot of people are familiar with it, where it says that, the man must love the woman, and the wife must submit to her husband, and the man is the head of the household. Mm-hmm. The lens that I was taught in my church about that verse is that in Matthew 20:25 through 28, Jesus says that the world defines power, or defines leadership through who has the power, the authority, and control, but that Jesus defined it through service. And so when Ephesians 5, which Ephesians 1 and 2 says mutual submission in all things, that when the Ephesians 5 is saying that the man is the head of the household, it means that he's meant to be the greatest servant of the home, not that he's supposed to be this authoritative force that is luring his power over everyone.
Take a beat. Everyone hear that? Stop using that verse wrong.
Yeah, no, and like that was something that, like, that's what I was taught from my pastors and from my church leaders and my pastors, and like, and from my mom. And
what's up, Mom? And that's kind of one of those things that I think really added to my deconstruction process as well, because I was raised in the same light, and my dad was bipolar, unmedicated, and was verbally abusive, and I just remember the whole thing being like, this unstable guy, the unstable one is the one who's the head of a house, who's like mentally and emotionally abusive to all of us. I was like, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him, not when he's unmedicated. Like, what do you mean he's the head of the house? And my mom at that time was very much in the submission mode, where, well, what he says goes. And I'm like, he can't think straight. Like, he has an issue. Like, he literally can't, So I never got that. And that's one of those things that made me, like, really take a step back. But, sorry, go on.
And so I would... But I would be... So I went to this really conservative college where everyone... I won't say absolutely everyone, but the vast, overwhelming majority were these very legalistic, very small-minded, small-hearted, conservative Christians that had a lot of trouble trying to make everything black and white and refused to see the gray. Yeah. And I had my own issues like that. Like, when I was Christian, I was very devoutly pro-life. But, like, not pro-life the way that, like, 99% of all pro-life people pissed me off. I was like, you don't care, you're pro-death penalty, you're pro-war, you don't care what happens to the baby after it's born. Yeah. No. But if we actually support these women that are in desperate situations, and if you tell a 16-year-old that she has to have the baby, then we need to not then preach to her personal responsibility when we pressured her into having the kid. So you were, like, practicing more so radical empathy, where you were pro-life because, a fetus is a person and they can tap dance. But then also, like, you have to take care of said kid. Let's get them housing. They need to be clothed. Like, you're not just doing Sunday lunch service. We need to be actually setting them up for a job and success. And let's make sure that the kids are brought in. So you're just, pro-life. Yeah, no, like, I tried to be an intellectually honest person, even when I was, like, going through this stuff, but, and when it came, one of the things that really, I guess, really opened up my mind and, like, had me rethinking a lot of things was the 2016 election, because I hated both of the candidates, and overall, I agreed more with the Democratic side, but being raised by a Calvinist conservative Christian father in a very conservative Christian area and going to a very conservative Christian college, like, they like beat into you that if you vote Democrat, then the blood of these babies are on your hands. You know, and so
it's back to that complicit sin thing. It's just such a weird modus operandi. Like, I don't understand why.
Because it's a very because they know if they can make people feel guilty that way, they will vote on that one issue alone. And that's what I did.
Oh, yeah.
In 2016, there was so much, and there's still so much misinformation about late-term abortions. But they had me convinced that people, you know,
on the day of birth, they're going to be
and so
up till 9 months and later. Okay.
You know, and I lived in a very red state. I voted for Trump, and even if I hadn't voted for Trump, the state still, you know, was Missouri, so it still would have gone for Trump. It did in the 2020 election. I did not vote for him in the 2020 election.
Growth. We love to see it.
Day after Trump won, I knew I had made a horrible, terrible mistake, because I saw how the Christian nationalists were emboldened in a way that I had never seen before, and that they were not going to hold him accountable. I remember I was hanging out with one of my friends, and her neighbor came over to like drop off milk. And I loved this friend because her kids were so much fun and so great to play with. And they were just like really like fun to like imagine with and stuff. And I was playing with one of her boys, and I was overhearing her with the neighbor talking about how they were so excited that Trump had won, and that they really believed that Trump was going to be humbled, that God was going to humble Trump to help him be an excellent president. And it took everything in me not to be like, based on fucking what? Like, Mister, grab them by the... Like, are you kidding? In the most powerful position in this.
That's so funny. I love it.
Gonna humble him?
I love it because they're admitting that they know he's wrong. They're admitting they don't like his actions, his rhetoric, his wealth, what he stands for, and how it all flies against Christianity. At least in paper form, at least in black and white, it all flies against Christianity. And so, instead of accepting that he's probably the wrong person, not only for the country but for a Christian leader, instead of just admitting that, they just openly jump straight into, but God's gonna change him. Like, now that he has the position, it's all like, good.
Literally the day after Trump won, that I was like, I am politically ignorant about too many topics that directly impact me as a human being. And I cannot afford to be that way anymore. So I decided to learn more about abortion, to learn more about education, about healthcare, about housing, about law enforcement, about, you know, the criminal justice system, about, I mean, everything. Yeah. And I also grew up in a very, very white area. I grew up in an area over 90% white. I checked our census. So,
I was going to say, how did you know that?
No,
you checked the census. Okay, you weren't outside taking like one white person, two black people, three.
In 1906, in the Springfield Town Square, 3 black men were lynched without a trial. It was an event. They made souvenirs. They called it the Easter offering.
What year was this?
1906.
Okay.
Yeah.
It made me feel a little bit better. Like, that's still awful. But for some reason, I thought you said 1996. And I was like...
No, 1906. 3 men were lynched without a trial. And nothing... There were no consequences whatsoever. It was, you know, because, like, the town leaders aren't going to criminalize themselves, right? So 3,000 black families moved away because they didn't want to die.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the population has never recovered. And so I grew up in a very white space with all of the blind spots that comes with that, with things that, you know, now I look back and I'm like, oh, okay, that was, you know, I would, you know, I didn't have a lot of queer people in my life, and I would catch myself thinking things like this girl I went to high school with, and I was a server after I graduated from college, and I had just been to a very conservative Christian college, and I served her, and she was with her girlfriend, and the very first thing I thought was, oh, Rachel became a duck. And then I immediately was horrified with myself, because I was like, that's a human being. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing talking about a person like that? And I had to really be like, okay, I need to expose myself to people who are different than me, because this comes from an inexperience. This comes from being in an echo chamber where, where you're not with people who are different from you, that are,
that's such a profound realization that I think so many people don't have. And I don't know whether it's because they just don't allow themselves to be introspective or be emotionally aware enough. But most people have sometimes even intrusive thoughts. Like you said, that wasn't necessarily ever your goal or your intent. And yet it's still
and I didn't say that to her. I treated her, with...
I expected you not to. But most people even have those intrusive thoughts and realize that they aren't theirs, that they're not inherent to them, that they're just like reacting instead of thinking. So for you to actually take that as a signal that maybe you should back up and try a more proactive role in seeing the world is a step that I want more people to get into in the future. Now, tomorrow, yesterday. Because it's an important step that I think a lot of people are missing, especially right now in America with things like trans bills. Maybe if you are terrified of trans people or drag queens, you should meet a trans person or drag
And that's
queen.
what, I remember the first time I ever learned about non-binary. I knew what, trans of, men, I watched Rent and I saw Angel and I thought Angel was a beautiful character. And, and I really liked, and so like I had started becoming introduced to that. And then in 2017, I became introduced through the show Billions to a non-binary character. That was the first time I had ever heard of the term non-binary or had it seen any representation for it. Yeah. And I thought it was fascinating. I didn't, because I was still a believing Christian who thought 100% of the Bible is true. I thought that, if God was intentional about creating you in your womb, then he was intentional about your gender. But I still wanted to meet people who were non-binary so that I could maybe come to understand it better, so that I could. And within 3 months, one of my coworkers came out as non-binary, and they changed their name. They went through this process, and and we became really good friends. And now I have come out as non-binary.
It's an infection. The infection is spreading.
Yeah. So I went through this entire kind of evolution of like starting from a very homophobic, transphobic, white-centric place. Yeah. To now, I'm still wanting to make more connection with people who are different from me, especially. Yeah,
it's like a lifelong thing. Yeah, it's an education journey, if you will. Yeah. What I would say, because we're getting close to like that 10-minute away mark, is
gotten into like the most recent trauma.
The most recent trauma. We're gonna have to have you back on when I'm not like breaking Riverside. What was I gonna say? Oh, so I wanted to make that bridge again, just to see like, okay, so like a roundabout, quick explanation. This is how I fixed it. It's not gonna be like that, but so you had this trauma that between your uncle and your father really made you question God's authority and or divine purpose, if you will. And then you were still at that time stayed Christian, but that's when the doubts started to come up. You went to college, and then you slowly but surely, after you graduated, started to open your eyes to other kinds of people. And how much of that is, I guess, interplays? So how much of opening yourself up to the world healed the trauma from when your uncle passed and your father was diagnosed? Or do you see your journey of healing just specifically those parts of the trauma in a different way? Where did you find the strength to kind of rebalance that?
So with my uncle, the bulk of the healing has actually come recently, because ever since I became an atheist, I have wanted to learn more about Judaism and about Jewish culture to kind of see where the line between like his mental illness and like the culture and the heritage and the faith, and like just how much anti-Semitism is in like Christianity itself that I had never ever noticed. And how that would have been so confusing for him, and why I could understand why he didn't feel like he really had a place. And then so that has been really helpful. As far as for when it comes to like the trauma with my dad, it was really just, with wanting to seek out and become friends with people who believed things that were different than me, I started becoming friends with atheists who would ask me some very poignant questions. And I had essentially come to like an own personal goal that I needed to have to do the research to find two pieces of information. So one was scientific evidence to prove that the creation narrative in Genesis happened, and historical archaeological evidence that Jesus resurrected from the dead. Because if I could find those two pieces of evidence, to me, everything else in the Bible could be possible.
Yeah, good luck. You'd also be the most famous person ever.
Right? So and I was going through all of these different, and I was not a very scientifically literate person. I'm still not. That's something I really struggle with. I love Forrest Valkai. I love Getzit Gibbon. I have to watch their stuff multiple times so that I might get half of it the like eighth time I watch it.
Same.
But it just wasn't adding up to me. I would listen to these Christian scientists trying to explain how the creation narrative in Genesis was possible, and I would...
Anytime someone says Christian scientist, not like the religion Christian Science, but I just hear Ken Ham's voice in my head, and it hurts.
It's painful, because I would be like, why are they forgetting the most... I'm the scientific moron, and yet I understand Einstein's law of relative gravity, or like, I would be like, why are they forgetting some of the most basic content?
They're not forgetting. They have to purposefully
I know.
it.
And I my dad about it, and he loves science, but he couldn't give me an answer that I found satisfying. And then when it came to...
Wait, is your dad a creationist?
Oh, hardcore creationist. Hardcore. Yeah. Yeah,
well,
he believes in like
that's terrifying.
A 6-day creation, yeah.
Even with the science, love. Even with the science.
I mean, he wrestles with that. That's his biggest thing, because he's someone. When I started going through evidence for the resurrection, I started seeing a lot of problems with it, and I could get into all of that, but I was finding it very. I was like, but how do we know that? That these are even if these are all eyewitness accounts, I learned later they weren't, but, even if these were eyewitness accounts, they could have eaten moldy bread or something. They could have been grieving and wanted it so badly to be true that people, because people can create memories that didn't happen.
That ergot happens to be.
Yeah. So I realized that, and one of the biggest things was, and this was after I realized, learned that the Gospels weren't written by eyewitnesses, was I had a pastor, and this was a different church because I had switched church at this time, but I had a pastor who said that the author of Luke wrote his gospel 4 years after Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and ascended to heaven. And that's why that gospel is so reliable, is because the memories were so fresh. And it took everything in me not to literally laugh out loud and be like, does he not think we have Google on our phones? Like, what? Like,
that's another thing. All of us deconstructing in like these later years, I feel like a lot of it doesn't have to do necessarily with us just being like older and wiser. It's literally just the advent of technology and it becoming unavoidable. Like, I know so many Mormons who avoid the CES letter, like it's a plague, but like it could pop up at any time if you Google the wrong thing. So like, answers start coming out in ways you might not even want them to. You might be Googling a verse about, or like a verse from Genesis because you're looking to read it, you know, and then you fall into a whole thing about how creationism doesn't make sense. And you're accidentally unwinding your theology, which is like a good thing. It's a bad thing also, though, because I think it causes dissonance for a lot of people. And you mentioned that too, especially when it comes to like gay people. I think earlier in the episode, I said that one of the biggest harms to the church is just the literalism thing, you know? By tying themselves to perfection or nothing, it kills the opportunity to have a religion, really.
One of the things...
Okay. The other thing is, though, homosexuality. And the fact that they've made this a huge target point and have for the past 30 years is the second nail in the coffin for evangelical Christianity, because it forces so many people into it. Because, like, while gay people are minorities, while we're rare at like 5 to 7%, it's in by no way rare enough that you'll never meet somebody who's gay, you know? So it's forcing Christians to be dissonant in a way that's like, I know Bob, I like Bob, I have to hate Bob, and putting them into that box and making them question why they hate somebody else that they actually don't hate, but they have to pretend to hate, is a disservice to Christianity in terms of how many people are leaving because of homosexuality alone.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's also like learning about people with different, like learning about different religions and learning about, you know, one of my closest friends is pagan. Mm-hmm. And she would be like, so you're choosing to believe 100% of the Bible is true. And I was like, well, it has to be true because that's, you know, like it has to, because otherwise it's not God's word.
That's the option.
She was just like, okay, so what about the verse that says that thou shalt not allow a witch to live? You know, and then like, you
gotta bury your darlings. That's a fair thing.
And like, you know, verses that say that Jews are the synagogue of Satan, and yet like, I have family that's Jewish. Like, am I supposed to believe all of them are in this synagogue? You know, it's
and
like...
Jesus was Jewish.
Right! Like...
What does it mean?
Right. And so, it really just made me... Like, there were just so many things, but then... You know, the point for me that was kind of my breaking point, because I had gone through... And the one thing, because I was starting to be like, I don't believe all of this is truth. I don't believe all of this is real.
Yeah.
But I couldn't explain the experiences that I had with the Holy Spirit. You know, I was like, but I've had these experiences, so what am I supposed to do with that? Mm-hmm. And one of my coworkers, who is a friend, we would talk all the time, he told me, and he was an atheist, and he was saying it with the best intentions, but he was like, Karayah, I just want you to know that if you become an atheist, you will go through dark periods of your life where you will regret it. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, you will go through really difficult times where you wish that you had a God to cry out to. And he shared with me about a health scare that he went through. He didn't tell me what the health scare was, but I had a pretty strong impression that it was HIV. Which, like, I don't want to add to that stigma, but he has a very severe anxiety disorder. So for him, waiting to, like, get that call to find out if he had it was like he said he was alone in his room fighting off panic attack after panic attack.
Yeah, been there,
And
been there.
he wished that he believed in a God that he could cry out to, that he could pray to for comfort, to make him feel like he wasn't alone in what he was going through. And because he was an atheist, he didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about that all night. And the next day I came to work and I asked him, you know, was your sister there with you? And he was like, yeah, but I don't really like to share my sexual health with her. And I was like, okay, that's fair. What if you had contacted me? Or, you know, you contacted some friends, you asked us, like, hey, I really need you right now. Can you please come over? And we just sat with you. And whether it was we, listened to the pain that you were going through and the anxiety so that you didn't feel alone in it, helped you take your mind off it entirely by telling jokes, by watching a show together, by doing something that let you know that you were not alone in what you were experiencing. Would you have still felt the need to cry out to a God? And he looked at me right in the eyes and he said, not even a little bit, not at once, not once, not at all.
Interesting.
And it was like a halogen went off in my brain that made me realize that every time that I had experienced the Holy Spirit, that what I really felt was the love and support of people around me.
Yeah.
I felt them touching me. I felt them putting their arms around me. I heard them praying for me because they cared and they cared about what I was going through and they wanted to make sure that I didn't feel alone in it. And I realized that all of it came from socialization and the brain.
Yeah, and community
someone,
connection is everything for human empathy and human just social health.
Yeah. And so that was kind of like, that was the literal moment I accepted I had become an atheist and that I didn't believe in any of it. And like, that was when, like, I stopped having hell anxiety. Like, it was, like, an instant for me. Like, it was like, oh, well, none of this is real. Like, from what I've learned, like, these things from the Bible aren't real. So, because I was a literalist, it was like, if one thing is wrong, it's all wrong. That's why that theology is so dangerous. Is because, like, the moment that I decided it was bullshit, I decided all of it was bullshit. I didn't need any of it. What I needed was people, which is why when I go through a really difficult time, if I'm going through a period of depression, if I'm going through a period of anxiety, and it's a really fine balance because you don't want to become dependent on people. Yeah. But I'm very quick to be like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Can we talk? Or, just let people know, like, hey, I'm not doing okay right now. And then they can decide if they want to reach out to me or not.
Right.
And yeah, so that, I hope that, I know that was like a long answer to like answer.
No, it was good. I saw more questions.
I do have
actually
more because, I've gone through even more since becoming an atheist.
Sure.
That I could absolutely, if you wanted me to come back on, that I could.
I do.
Get into.
We're going to have you on for another episode sometime in the future. I don't know what that looks like, because this is all new. Episode 2. I don't think I even did like a proper introduction. Hi everyone on YouTube. Welcome to UNtracing Trauma. We had technical snafus in the beginning, and I will no longer be using Riverside, but glad I paid them. I did like a year up front. Now I'm like regretting it. I'm like, why did I do that? I could just use StreamYard and paid StreamYard the same, I think. But we'll see. Anyway, speaking of money things, and somebody else in the chat brought up the fact that there was Discord pinging going on. That's what the pings were. I don't know if that was on your side, Karayah, but there's been pinging. I apologize for that.
You have a Discord?
Yeah. It's Discord, I guess. I closed my Discord window, and it still happens, but it's cool. But speaking of Discord and money things, I now have a Patreon. Something that I teased last week when we were doing this show, and I haven't announced, I guess, like on TikTok or Instagram yet. We, now have just 2 basic levels, nothing super fancy yet. I might extend that and have more like tiers for like a special exclusive podcast or content or something. We haven't figured that part out, but you let me know and or like maybe a free shirt or something. Who knows? Anyway, the most basic tiers are just like $2. That's just a tip tier to say thank you and just hopefully, I guess, share support. I feel so weird talking about Patreon stuff, by the way. And a $5 tier, which is called the Discipleship. It's fun. It's cheeky. Join my cult. And for the $5 tier, that gets you access to our Discord, the JeGaysus Discord, where we can talk about whatever. And if you have questions about a video, we can talk about that. Or you want to just, like, talk to me at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, that's how you do it. So check that out. All the links are in my bio, which is kind of hard to find on YouTube, but you have to just click the extender link. It's a thing. Or in my shorts, I always post, it's in the description of this video that you're watching now. Ha! Okay, my ramble's over. You know where to find me. My name's JeGaysus. Karayah, where do they find you? Do you have any projects coming up or anything exciting? And then we'll move into the Q&A portion.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be starting my own YouTube channel this year. I would really like to get it up and running within the next month or two. I'm just trying to like make my logo now because I figured out what I'm going to call it and what I'm going to call each section. So I'm going to have, so my YouTube channel is going to be called Courageous Hearts. My username on TikTok, on YouTube, and on Twitter and Instagram. Mm-hmm. That is it. It's Courageous, but it's spelled like my name. And whenever I get the channel up and running, I'm going to be calling it Courageous Hearts. And I'm going to have 2 segments. So the first one is what I call the 3 L's of allyship or advocacy. So it's listening to marginalized voices, learning from their experiences, and lifting their voices up. So
I love that.
I'm going to be talking with people in the deconstruction community who are, so that we can get different perspectives. I'm also going to have discussions about deconstruction, whether it's the work that a scholar is doing that I think is a very interesting perspective, or if it's someone telling their deconstruction story and their experiences. And that is going to be called Courageous Heart Stories.
Love it.
So I am going to be getting that started with this year. And then, you can find me. I'm probably the most active on Twitter. That is my current, like the platform where I have the most followers. I'm almost at like 5,000 followers, which I know like isn't a lot compared to some people, but
your Twitter is banging though. I pretty much only get interactions from you.
Yeah,
but it's good because you like keep me up to date more than the news on TikTok does sometimes. So that's good.
I share a lot about the growing dangers of Christian nationalism. I also, to educate about it, I also share a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot of memes. So if you like memes, check out my Twitter.
Check it out. I don't think we have any questions coming in. I did check a little bit. We only have like one guy yelling in here, so there's that. Let me check him out real quick. All on earth felt the fire Satan pulls down from heaven. The dates, October 10th, 2005 and March 31st, 2020. Other times Satan did not make it speak. Those two, they're deleted. I'm trying to read them.
I think I've interacted with that person before, and they're very anti-Semitic, so...
Bye, guy. That was the only question I had is why not Allah? Why not talk about Allah? Which I've covered 1 billion times, but because I'm not Muslim. I was not raised in Islam, and I don't know enough about Islam.
There are some amazing people to support. If you want to support... ex-Islam voices, Infidel Noodle.
Infidel Noodle's amazing.
Apostate
Aladdin.
Yeah, like there are people whose voices, like, listen to their stories, listen to their experiences, and share other people's experiences too. But
Boom.
I think it's important to stay in your lane and speak about what you know. I know what it's like to be a Jewish person who was raised exclusively Christian and became an atheist. And so I have a lot of experiences with that. And so that is what I talk about.
Also, it's ironic because they asked, why didn't you talk about Allah? Like, that's all we've been doing this whole entire conversation. Like, they do realize Allah is just God in Arabic, right? That the word is just God. It's the same God. Like, if you are talking about, even if you think of them as two different entities and you're talking about the Christian God, it would still be saying Christian Allah. Because it's a word. Anyway.
Yep.
So, we've been doing it all day, my man.
Yep.
Anyway, I guess that wraps it about up. I'm going to double check chat just one more time for questions. I'm not seeing them, but thank you to everyone for being here. I will see you next week. I don't know the time yet. Right now, I'm going to narrow it down to Saturdays and Sundays. I was filming a music video in LA. Again, if you want pictures, go to the Discord. I'll send you more there if you ask for them. I don't know when that'll be out either, but yeah, so I was helping Mother Victory do that, and that's why we're on a Monday tonight, but next week we'll be back on Saturday or Sunday. I don't know with who. We have a lot of guests lined up, and I just need to figure out which one's gonna be which, but I do tentatively want to say it's I Blame Bill, as long as she's free next weekend.
So much.
It's gonna be good.
She's one of my favorite humans on the planet. She's
amazing.
I would just, like, and I mean this, I know I'm bisexual and she's bisexual, but I don't mean this in a sexual. I would just follow her around and be like, tell me all of your stories. Give me all of like, tell me everything. Like,
she was supposed to be the first guest, and I messed it up because I sent out a calendar thing, and she scheduled herself in for a date, and then, like, the morning of, she's like, what do you need me to do today? And I was like, it never even sent me an email saying that, like, this was happening, so I didn't set anything up. It was terrible. But, yeah, hopefully this weekend, we'll see what she says, and I'll announce it here as soon as I know it. I have more information. But outside of that, I'm going to also establish this as a podcast, and when, I don't know, but I have already had people ask, like, you know, because people prefer different things, and someone just wants to listen to it in a car and stuff. Totally get it. I'm a podcast person more than I am a live person. So I'll have the first episode edited down sometime this week, and it will be on Spotify and all those places. But yeah, thank you all for your interactions. And today we hit 30,000 subscribers.
That's so exciting.
So that's very cool.
How many hours?
Still not monetized, but that's okay.
How many hours are you at?
I'm at 1,700 out of the needed 4,000.
Okay. So,
but if you want to talk how many hours am I at with shorts, I have 25,000 hours. So in 30-second intervals that don't count.
Yeah.
But I do have 9 million. We're at 9 million views out of 10 million shorts views, which is the other way you can get to monetization. So as long as I have, like, one more viral short, we're in there. But yeah, no, right now, unfortunately, the video I had get like 4 million views would have been worth something like $7,000 if I were already in the program, but I'm not. So I probably should have started this a little earlier. We'll have another viral someday. It'll be good.
Yeah, it'll be good.
But yeah, so that's just all the catch-ups, I guess. I don't know what else to say except for I love everybody, and I hope you have a good night. And thank you again, Karayah, for coming on. We'll have you on later to go through even more, because I know we're just, like, only touching surface level stuff, and I want this to be a free therapist office for you.
Awesome.
And, yeah, thank you so much. Kisses. Love everyone. Goodbye.
Like and subscribe, share.
Oh, like and subscribe. That's a thing people say.
Yes.
Like, subscribe, do things. Okay.
Share it with people. If
share.
You help
yes.
them. Or if you it'll enrage them and they'll go on a rant and make a response video that boosts the original content views. Like, whatever.
If you know Ben Shapiro, give him my number. You know, things like that.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I love it.
Much love, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next week. And obviously, I'll just see you in the comments and discords. Bye.
Bye.